Good evening. Welcome to the Golden Bridge. I'm Dana Gioia, the Judge Whitney Professor of Poetry and Public Culture at the University of Southern California. And once again, it is my pleasure to introduce an extraordinary evening of choral music, selected, commissioned, and conducted by the incomparable Susie Digby. Los Angeles is a city full of great music, but even by the celestial standards of the City of Angels, the Golden Bridge concerts present something compelling, original, and unique. When Susie Digby first came to Los Angeles, she could very easily have presented the same concerts for which she is so celebrated in the UK. Simply to hear that repertoire performed so magnificently would have in itself been cause enough for Angelenos to rejoice. Instead, Digby did something bold and even transformative. She created a series of concerts that were rooted both in the culture of California and in the legacy of British music. These concerts have changed, at least in my case, the way I perceive California's own musical tradition. The Golden Bridge concerts grew out of Susie Digby's conviction that there is a creative renaissance of choral music occurring in Los Angeles of global significance. Much of it centered at the University of Southern California, and most powerfully represented by the music of Morton Lauridsen, his colleagues, students, and associates. They were creating memorable and moving music that was both innovative and yet deeply rooted in the traditions of choral music. Digby has used the metaphor of the Golden Bridge to symbolize her vision. The concerts, tonight is the sixth in this distinguished series, represent a bridge between the past and the present, between England and America, between the choral traditions and new work, a conversation, therefore, between continents, eras, and cultures. But the concerts, which always include world premieres by California and West Coast composers, represent especially a bridge between the golden age of British Tudor music, the period of William Byrd and Thomas Tallis, with the creative explosion that is currently happening in the Golden State, which Digby dramatizes by pairing choral classics of the Renaissance with new work. So, without further ado, let me introduce the Golden Bridge Choir and that transatlantic, pan-Pacific choral impresario, the Pontifex Maxima of our Golden Bridge, Lady Susie Digby.
Good evening. Good evening. 25 years ago, back in 1994, I was back in the UK after several years in Hong Kong. And when I hit the UK choral scene, everyone was talking about this amazing new piece, Omnium Mysterium, by the American composer Morton Lauridsen. What was striking is that both the singers and the audience members had become passionate about it almost overnight. How could I have possibly known or dreamt that this extraordinary composer was to become a dear, close friend, and that his influence was to shape the language of choral music worldwide? Morton is the president of Golden Bridge, our choir, and for want of a more glamorous analogy, is the glue that binds us all here tonight. It's hard to tell, isn't it, which music written in this century will be performed in centuries to come. But in my mind, it is certain that this piece will be. So we celebrate the 25th anniversary of this masterpiece tonight with a performance by the wonderful Golden Bridge Singers. I can't count the number of times I've conducted it all over the world, but this occasion is very, very special, particularly as we have in the audience Marshall Rutter, who commissioned it for his wife, Terry Knowles, who's also here, for the LA Master Chorale. So 6 years ago, I started a big commissioning program, identifying Californian composers, giving them a piece of English polyphony from the Renaissance, and asking them to reimagine this piece that was written 450, 500 years ago from their own perspective. I've given them quite a vague brief, if you like. I've asked them to keep their composition to the same length as the original, but beyond that I've really let the composers be very free in the way they wish to reimagine the original. So they could use the same text, they can use a new text, they can use the same structure and form as the original, really whatever they like. They could use one chord. In fact, one of my compositions, one of my commissions, bases the entire piece on one single chord from a piece by Weelkes. What's remarkable about this collection of 22 pieces that we've commissioned is they're all so different. There's nothing generic about them. There's a sort of freedom of expression and quality of experience together with these extraordinary singers that I'm working with. So we have a range of compositions from highly tonal to quite experimental, to highly contrapuntal, to very simple, and it really is thrilling. I can't think of any other movement in the world where there's a choral collection of such diversity and variety and quality. And I have these wonderful 20 singers, mainly taken from the LA Master Chorale, professional singers, who come together and bring these pieces to life in one evening. So we pair the Renaissance original with the contemporary Californian reimagining of the original. So what's noticeable is that the composers here, I think, are finding a real confidence, a sort of sure-footedness about what they're doing. They all come to each other's concerts and encourage each other, and there's this sort of feeling that there's a renaissance, a new movement springing here that I hope will last well into the next decade. Most of the Renaissance music you're hearing tonight was composed under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, who was a very musical and cultured monarch. She reigned for 45 years. Our current queen has reigned for 67 years, 213 days. Whoa! I feel very emotional about our Queen. She's the patroness of our college, Queen's College, Cambridge in England, of which my husband is the president. So we've had the pleasure of getting to know her a little. Last month, aged 93, she came to lunch at the college and lit up the place with her wit, her interest in all of us, her incredible wisdom, world experience, above all, her complete lack of vanity, extravagance, or imperiousness. She's a true servant of the country. When William Byrd, one of the greatest composers, wrote the piece you're about to hear 5 centuries ago for Queen Elizabeth I, he used a text that sums up what the Queen is to us today. She has served us to perfection, and long may she reign. Melinda Bargreen has taken the same text and created something very special indeed for us to take to our living Queen. Melinda, would you like to come and say a few words about it?
so much. The first thing that happened to me when I found that I was going to be one of the wonderful Golden Bridge Project composers was, of course, to dance around the room several times. And after that, I started getting busy finding the right text. And as Susie has so eloquently put it, you could hardly do better than this work of William Byrd, which has so much relevance for our time today. And as I considered the piece, I thought what I wanted to do in a musical way is to use a language that would be maybe barely recognizable to the Elizabethans, but to lift the lid a bit, to expand it outward a little bit, to make the harmonic structure a little bit more rich, a little bit more unusual, but still keeping the same tenor of the piece, keeping something of the original with it. So they're about the same length. They start in a similar way, and then mine kind of goes its own way after that a bit. But the ideas in there, the verse that says, and give her her heart's desire, I thought, what would this woman who has given her life in such a wonderful way to public service and has endured so much war, tragedy, brilliant success, the highs and the lows of more than a generation, what would be her heart's desire? And I would like to think that great music, beautiful music, music that lifts us up might be a great part of that. And certainly I'm reliant on this choir, as always, to produce something that gives me my heart's desire, which is a gorgeous performance. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity. Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Melinda Bargreen. I'm one of the very fortunate composers of this year's Golden Bridge Commission project, which is absolutely a wonderful idea in that we all are in some way reflecting a great Renaissance masterpiece in 21st century terms. That's a completely open door for all of us. We can choose how we want to approach the piece. We're supposed to try to keep to about the same length as the original, but beyond that, all the lids are off. And in my case, I had a hard time choosing which of the Renaissance masterpieces that I wanted to recast because they're all so great. And of course, the fact that they're so great makes them a very tough act to follow. I picked William Byrd's "O Lord, make thy servant Elizabeth our Queen" for a number of reasons. For one thing, it's a great piece. It's beautifully crafted. It uses words and music in the most organic and responsive ways, and there's a nice symmetry there in that we have another Elizabeth the Queen on the throne right now, and I thought, wouldn't it be nice to, in some respect, pay homage to the present as well as the past? So we've got two Elizabeths and two pieces. My piece starts in a very similar manner to the Byrd original, and then I kind of try to take the lid off a little bit, to expand the piece, to let it blossom into the 21st century, to use slightly different tonalities, to stretch the range of the piece a little bit. The basses go lower, the sopranos take off. I try to have interior voices moving in unusual ways and just sort of expand, kind of blow some modern breath into the piece. I've never heard it performed yet. That pleasure awaits me. I can imagine only how wonderful it's going to be because I've heard other Golden Bridge pieces, and of course Susie Digby's work with the ORA singers, or should we call them Aura singers. She is a fantastic, instinctive conductor. She's wonderful with voices. She seems to be able to shape and craft them the way you would clay or some other tactile media. It's absolutely amazing to me how she gets the depth of sound that she does from the singers and also the delicacy. A tremendous, tremendous conductor, and it's very wonderful to be associated with her and with this project. In a way, my bridge into this commission was Morton Lauridsen, the wonderful choral composer whom we all enjoy so much and revere as a person, a friend, and a master of music.
Truly legendary Billy Childs, winner of multiple Grammys. He's blushing here. One of the greatest jazz pianists in the world and an outstanding composer of choral music. by Orlando Gibbons, the favourite composer of the pianist Glenn Gould, even above Bach. He's chosen such a powerful text, that is, really has. I know what the caged bird feels by Dunbar, and he's integrated into his piece passages of piano improvisation. This is what we're so incredibly excited about. You'll hear so much imagery that conjures in his head as he immerses himself in the text he has chosen and the themes he's used while he's improvising at the piano. Before Billy introduces this piece, I'd like him to present his signed score to my wonderful friend Emily Laskin and her husband Michael, who I'm not sure is here, who has sponsored the work, and Emily is a trustee of Golden Bridge. Emily.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I'm always at a loss when I have to talk about the music that I wrote and that I play, but I'll try to be coherent. When Susie approached me about writing this piece, I love the concept, first of all. I love the idea of bridging English Renaissance music with composers from Los Angeles. English Renaissance music centuries ago, composers of Los Angeles today, and finding common ground. And I found common ground with this Orlando Gibbons poem, "Oh Lord, How Do My Woes Increase." It made me think of the situation of Black Americans throughout history, this country having been founded on slavery, and the toll that that's taken on the Black African Americans, and what we've had to endure, and where we've come. And this subject of race has been kind of on my mind pretty much all my life, but in a lot of my most recent work, because of the current administration and how it kind of engenders this separation. It's my hope that through my work it inspires people to look at each other as human beings and as equals and as brothers and sisters. That is the goal of everything I've been writing lately. So that was kind of what I found commonality with. The suffering aspect of this Orlando Gibbons piece moved me a lot, talking about a person who is going through a Job-like suffering and having the Lord not really hear his cries of woe, kind of brought to mind this poem by Dunbar, Sympathy, and how it's describing the Black existence in America and comparing it to a caged bird, which in my mind kind of is a metaphor for the prison industrial complex, where there are a lot of people disproportionately locked in cages. So I wanted to kind of highlight these things, and so all of this has been on my mind, and all of this is behind my composition, Sympathy. Hope you enjoy it. Hi. My name's Billy Childs, and I'm one of the commissioned composers for this upcoming concert for the Golden Bridge Choir. I was asked by Susie Digby to compose a piece. Susie has this concept of taking pieces from the Renaissance era, from early music, and commissioning composers to write a companion piece to it. So my piece is based off off of a Paul Laurence Dunbar poem. Actually, it's not based off of, it's a setting of the text of the Paul Laurence Dunbar poem called Sympathy, which is the title of my piece. I chose that poem because it's similar in expressing the suffering of the black in America, comparing that suffering to the lack of freedom, comparing it to being a caged bird. And the companion piece is from the Orlando Gibbons, and it's a piece called "Oh Lord, How Do My Woes Increase?" So that's where I found common ground. What I wanted to do was also play with the choir. So I wrote it in such a way that left it open for me to improvise and kind of color as I saw fit. There are certain parts that are written and go along with the choir. It's kind of like a piano obligato, and there are other parts where I kind of comment on the whole thing. At certain points I wanted to mimic a bird flying free and then getting trapped, and then kind of a wistful, contemplative expression of the bird's plight. I wanted to say a word about Susie. I think she is just a phenomenal musician and a phenomenal conductor, and she commissioned me for this. And I'd come a few times before to hear other concerts, and I was always knocked out. And I'm knocked out by her professionalism and her incredible knowledge of music and incredible knowledge of voice and how to make things, come to life with the human voice. She's really great, and I'm having such a great time working with them.
It's special, isn't it? This is the 8th consecutive year my husband and I have been coming to Los Angeles to teach at USC. One of the great discoveries I made this year, by the way, can you hear me at the back? I'm so sorry, I forgot the microphone. One of the great discoveries I made this year is the grocery store Erewhon. What a revelation. As you know, Erewhon is nowhere backwards. The term for this in music is retrograde, an exact mirror. Nick Strimple, Dr. Nick Strimple, my exasperatingly knowledgeable co-teacher at Thornton School, when I asked him to reflect Robert Parsons' famous Ave Maria, he came up with a genius idea. The first half is an exact mirror of the second half, which is the piece itself with some hidden secrets. Hence, Mary's mirror was born. We're going to start it in a circle for the retrograde, the backwards half, and then we're going to turn to face the audience when the music goes forwards. And I would like to invite Nick up to say a very few, don't show off too much, Nick. We're always battling for the center ground in class. To say a few words about his composition, Mary's Mirror.
Where am I? Susie, when she first asked me to do Ave Maria, a basic reflection on Parsons' Ave Maria, the first piece that popped into my head was Lay Lady Lay by Bob Dylan. And so I decided that I wanted to, I knew that I was going to turn the piece around because this is the fourth piece I've written for Golden Bridge, and I wanted to do something that was really different from what I've done before. And so I looked carefully at just the opening part of Lay Lady Lay. I discarded the text, but just the tune. And I used the first 10 pitches, and I changed one or two of the intervals. And when I took all rhythm out and just had this string of notes, I was really not surprised to see that or to hear that it sounds very much like any number of Gregorian chants. So I created a long note cantus firmus out of those 10 notes. And then I took I chopped it up into 2 little parts and used those as embellishing figures to start phrases. The great challenge was to make the cantus firmus work in such a way that, like it did in medieval and Renaissance music, where all of the counterpoint around the cantus firmus seems to have grown out of it and complements it, the cantus itself. I didn't want it to feel like the cantus firmus was imposed in any way on Parsons' music. And I finally came up with solutions, I think, to those problems. And I hope you like it.
My name is Nick Stremple. I've had the honor to work with Golden Bridge since its inception, and the piece that will be heard on this concert is the 3rd reflection that I have composed for them. For this one, Susie surprised me a little bit because she asked me if I would do a reflection on Robert Parsons' Ave Maria. The first thing that I thought of when she said Parsons' Ave Maria was Bob Dylan's Lay Lady Lay. I didn't know how that connected exactly, but I had that, for some reason that tune connected in my, or part of the first 10 notes of that song connected in my mind with Parsons' Ave Maria. So I didn't bring in extra text, I just decided to work around these 10 notes with the Parsons. And I asked Susie if any of the composers who have written reflections for her before, not only for Golden Bridge, but also in England for her great group, Aura, I asked her if any of those people had literally done a literal retrograde of the music that they were being asked to write a reflection around. And she said no, and after she thought about it some more, she came back and she still said no, that nobody had done that. And so I thought, well, I'm going to see, this was a great, very popular technique in the Middle Ages for composers to write a piece and then turn it around backwards. And so I wanted to see if Parsons would work that way, and also if I could make these 10 notes of the other song fit as a long note cantus firmus, which is also a medieval and a Renaissance technique where a tune, pre-existing tune would exist in very long notes in the tenor part usually, and all of this fabulous polyphony would be embroidered around it. Now in this case, instead of starting with the cantus and creating the polyphony, I was starting with the polyphony and trying to figure out how I could fit the cantus firmus into it.
Could there be a more brutal example of historic female subjugation than having your head chopped off in public by your husband? This was the fate of Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second of 6 wives. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Alex Shapiro to the stage to tell us about her setting of the poem Anne wrote as she was awaiting execution. And first, I think we have someone to thank, don't we? So can I please ask Jonathan Aronson and Joan Abramson, who are the sponsors, the generous sponsors of this piece, to come up and collect from Alex a signed score.
The arts continue to flourish because of amazing musicians like those behind me and Susie, and because of fantastic patrons like the two of you. And I can't thank you enough for participating as you do in Golden Bridge and in Music of the Future. And I will just read the brief inscription to Jonathan Aronson and Joan Abramson with tremendous heartfelt thanks for enabling me to bring Anne's moving words and the plight of too many other women around the world to modern day audiences. So thank you. When Susie invited me to contribute a piece to this evening, I immediately, as everybody did, immediately go to text. What are we going to set? And I was thinking about all the pieces from the early English Renaissance that we know are all written by men, of course, because women were shut out of the process of contributing to the arts back then. It just wasn't done. And I decided, well, you know, there are all these scores from that period that are marked anonymous. They're attributed to anonymous. Sometimes anonymous was indeed a man, but you know what? Sometimes it actually was a woman. So I decided, I'm not a scholar, I'm merely a composer, but I decided to do some research and figure out who were these women? Who were the English women writing at that time? And I couldn't find anything. There was really very little out there. But the one name that kept coming up repeatedly from many scholars was Anne Boleyn, our doomed second wife of Henry VIII. And as I said her moving text, it's an incredible text. And I couldn't help but think that 483 years later, not enough has changed for women. For women who live present day around the world in Muslim countries, for the most part, that are enforcing the harshest interpretations of Sharia law, these women are still being burned, being lashed, being stoned, and even being beheaded by men and by governments. And so I just decided, you know, I'd like to have Anne's words of her own plight live on in this piece that you're going to hear to help us raise a bit of awareness of our women around the world who are still suffering. So I can't thank Susie and the Golden Bridge musicians enough for the absolute thrill and joy of hearing the sonic chaos that's in one's head come to life. It is an extraordinary thing, and I am so grateful. And I also want to just add that one of the Golden Bridge themes, of course, as Susie said, is this connection to California. And I feel a little bit like a, interloper. But I come by this honestly, as a number of people in this audience know who are my very dear friends. I lived in Los Angeles for 24 years. Until 12 years ago, I moved up to San Juan Island. And it's a really great thing that I moved up to San Juan Island, because guess who else lives there? Morton Lauridsen. And we've come full circle because, of course, the reason I am here is because Morton is among the most generous human beings and loves to connect people with other people, right? That's what he does. And, of course, I know Susie and John through, and Dana and Mary through Morton. So we've come full circle, and I'm very grateful. So thank you.
Hi, I am Alex Shapiro, and I'm a composer. I live up on San Juan Island off the coast of Washington State, but for 24 years I lived here in Los Angeles. So I feel really lucky to be part of this California-based concert tonight, which is thanks to the visionary Susie Digby and the amazing Golden Bridge Choir that has started a series for several years now. I guess this is their 6th year, where they are juxtaposing the early English Renaissance music with new music written by mostly California or California-connected composers, new pieces that are inspired by that older music. And so it gives an incredible concert experience for the audience to have the very old and the very, very new right next to each other. It's really quite exciting. And it's been a real joy for me to be part of this project. My piece is probably the most adventurous thing on the program, in that it's electroacoustic. And there are not many electroacoustic choral works out there. I basically create a seamless blend, when it goes right, of the 20-member choir and their gorgeous voices with a very big, almost cinematic, pre-recorded track that is an inherent part of the piece. The track is written at the same time as the voices. It's basically just writing an orchestral piece or a big choir piece with orchestra, anything. It's all done at the same time. But it's created by sounds that I could not get out of instruments. You know, I couldn't get these sounds from a bassoon or a viola. I can't get them from the singers themselves, because voices can do so much. Instead, I think about sounds and frequencies and textures that I really want to hear along with the voices, and then I program them, or I find them in existing sound libraries and I tweak them to make them exactly what I want them to be. So the result is that not only is one a composer, but you're a recording engineer and a recording mixer and a mastering engineer and everything else. But it's great fun. I have done a lot of these pieces for large ensembles like Symphonic Wind Band, where you have 100 people on stage and the balance of the track, and it's all seamless. So this is my first time doing it with choir, and in fact this is my first serious choir piece. This is the first time that I've heard it all together, and I have to say it is beyond thrilling. I don't think there's a word for, it's probably like a parent seeing their baby for the first time. Because all the sonic chaos that's in my head as a composer, where I know in my head what I think it sounds like and what I want it to sound like, suddenly there it is. And lo and behold, it actually does sound like what I thought it would sound like, except with much better voices. So it's really been a thrill. It's been just an incredible experience tonight to hear this piece.
Dana mentioning the significance of USC in everything, in every aspect of our life here. All of tonight's composers have some connection, either directly or indirectly, with USC. Our next composer is Christian Graces, Associate Professor of Choral Music at Thornton School, a fantastic Venezuelan conductor and composer. He's chosen to reflect Purcell's Hear My Prayer, one of the great choral masterpieces of all time. And he's brought his electrifying Venezuelan roots to his composition, accompanied by Aaron Safati on the Venezuelan Cumaco drum. Here is Christian to introduce his piece, and please don't show off as much as Nick did.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, Susie, this is such an amazing opportunity for me, so thank you so much. I'm very, very honored. And what a wonderful audience. To understand this piece, I think you need to come with me on a journey to my country, Venezuela. Like many other countries in Latin America, small communities, towns, villages, they have services, religious services that combine Catholic ideas with the ideas of other religions, many of which come from the western part of Africa via the slaves. And so this piece is essentially a description of one of these religious services. You're going to hear some bells at the beginning bringing people together. The prayer, the communal prayer starts, and you're going to hear that in the first third of the piece. The middle section will depict a religious leader at some point having a call and response with the the community. And then eventually, like it happens in many of these ceremonies, the drums come out, and then the prayer turns into a wonderful celebration of dance. Given our connection with Africa, there's plenty of rhythm that we've inherited from that region. So you will hear a lot of rhythmic passages in this piece. And I just want to highlight one in particular, because it's the first time in my life I attempt to do something like this. And there has been quite a number of sleepless nights thinking, will this work or not? And this happens in the last third of the piece, where the drum starts. I will be starting the drum, and then Aaron will play a wonderful solo, like it's very traditional in the drums. The choir joins the drum, and we're all together. And at some point, the drum will keep playing in the same 6/8 meter, and the choir goes off and does multimeter, creating polyrhythmic textures and layers that will eventually, hopefully, come together. And then eventually will diverge again, and at the very end will come together once more. Or so I hope. Enough talking, more sounds.
It was a call by Susie Digby that came in 2018 to create a companion piece to Purcell's wonderful Hear My Prayer. It was the perfect opportunity for me to set a text that I had wanted to set for many years, which is the text of De Profundis. And I thought it would be interesting to connect that with my roots in Venezuela. So I immediately wanted to set the piece as a representation of a religious service. The composition I wrote is essentially 3 moments or 3 scenes in what could potentially be a syncretic religious service. And in this case, well, they are praying for God to hear their prayer. There's an element of drama here, an element of anxiety, of longing for the attention of this deity. There are interesting elements in the piece that I incorporated. One of them has naturally to do with the rhythmic aspects, because these cultures are very connected to the rhythmic traditions of Western Africa. And so we've inherited this love, this connection to rhythmic structures. So the first section is very rhythmic. And it's not only rhythmic within the writing of the choir, but it also incorporates elements of clapping, so your rhythmic elements within it. And then the third section is really interesting, first because you have the element of the drum, and the drum that we used is a cumaco drum that is a very typical drum from the central coast of Venezuela. It's an elongated drum carved out of a trunk of a tree, and it's usually performed or played by at least 2 percussionists, and the choir joins the drum in a 6/8 meter, and eventually they will be displaced, meaning that the drum will continue in 6/8 and the choir now will be singing in this wonderful multi-meter section that creates layers of polyrhythmic layers and interactions between the drum and the choir. And what's really interesting is that this generates this anxiety, which is what I picture somebody calling for God to hear your prayer. This kind of internal struggle is signified by this dichotomy in rhythm that will eventually come together once again.
Golden Bridge is a unique group, I think, certainly in California and probably in the United States, because Susie is only with us for 5 or 6 weeks in the fall, so the Golden Bridge can only do 1 concert. She has auditioned 20 of the best, very best young professional singers in Los Angeles. All of them have careers of their own, but they take time out to do this one gig every year. It has enriched Southern California's choral community enormously because of the quality of the work they do. Also, they were made to sing in All Saints Church in Beverly Hills, which has one of the great acoustics for unaccompanied choral singing in all of the area. And we're just fortunate to have Susie Digby and the Golden Bridge here in Los Angeles demonstrating her belief that the golden age of Tudor polyphony during the reigns of Henry VIII through Elizabeth I in England is paralleled in Southern California now with the quality of choral music being produced not only by performing groups but also by the composers that we have here. And to my mind, this is something really valuable and quite special.